I remember the day I fell in love, sunlight streaming through her parents' summer house, my reflection blinking back from polished wood floors. I came from a modest home filled with fresh laundry and home-cooked meals. She belonged to a world of sleek cars, galas, and wealthy acquaintances who smiled politely but looked down on outsiders. That day, none of that mattered. Her laughter, her shining eyes, her dreams. I believed love could bridge any gap. "Can you stay longer?" she asked as we sat on a park bench near her estate, her name carved into the paint from childhood. It was before the engagement, before money complicated everything. Her father, Phil, a real estate mogul. Her mother, Maëlle, M for short, a woman who hosted charity luncheons and flew to Europe for shopping trips. Meanwhile, I came from a quiet neighborhood where neighbors chatted over chain-link fences, my father a retired teacher, my mother a part-time baker. We had no luxury, but we had enough, something her family would never understand. "I have an early shift at the sporting goods store," I told her. She pouted, leaning against me. "I just hate it when you leave." Her warmth in that moment made everything else fade. I didn't care about my dusty shoes or last year's jeans. I thought she loved me anyway. Our romance grew, but so did my awareness of her parents. Maëlle, poised and sharp, could silence a room with a glance. Phil, my father-in-law-to-be, was big in presence if not in height, known for giving casual remarks that sounded more like threats. They tolerated me for her sake, but never hid their belief that a middle-class man wasn't good enough. "Congratulations," Phil said, shaking my hand stiffly the night we announced our engagement. "We're, happy for you both." "Thank you, sir," I said. "Just Phil is fine," he said. "We'll see how all this works out." Those words rang in my ears. "We'll see how all this works out." A chill lingered, one I tried to ignore by focusing on my fiancé's radiant smile. Still, deep down, I sensed that these people saw me as an intruder into their world. A few days later, my wife-to-be and I visited her parents' house to set a wedding date. Maëlle and Phil sat us down at a polished mahogany table. Phil pushed a folder across the surface. "I have something I need you to sign," he said. Inside was a prenuptial agreement. It spelled out that any inheritance or trust funds that came from her family, properties, businesses, large gifts, would remain solely hers. Meanwhile, any major assets we acquired during our marriage, including lotteries or game show winnings, would be considered marital property. The sections about windfalls were suspiciously detailed, especially under the heading Financial Windfalls and Gains. They had practically zeroed in on the possibility of a jackpot scenario. My name was sprinkled through in formal legalese. The prospective spouse consents to— "Is this absolutely necessary?" I said. "Standard procedure in well-off families," Maëlle said, her voice smooth as silk. "You understand." I glanced at my fiancée for support. She stood off to the side, her face unreadable. I guess it's not a big deal," she said. "My parents just want to protect family assets. It won't change anything between us." I should have protested more, but I was deeply in love and anxious to keep the peace. I reasoned that if I genuinely cared about her, signing a few forms was no big deal. I pressed the pen to the paper, my signature forever binding me to the terms of an agreement I only half understood. As I signed, Phil watched me with an oddly triumphant half smile. "Welcome to the family," he said. 6 months later, we had a lavish lakeside wedding. My parents were stunned by the extravagance. Imported flowers, a 5-tier cake, a live orchestra. I'd never seen my father so out of place. He wore his best suit, still looking uncomfortable under the scrutiny of distant relatives who kept asking, "So, how did your son meet her?" Despite the tension, the wedding photos showed a day of sunshine and laughter. My wife looked stunning in her lace gown, and I felt unstoppable in that moment, like we were forging a union of love stronger than any social or financial gulf. We moved into a condominium that Phil called a gift. In reality, he'd paid the down payment, but I was expected to cover monthly mortgage payments. My father-in-law didn't phrase it like an ultimatum. He simply said, "You'll handle the monthly bills, right, son?" And so I did, quietly ignoring the sense that I was paying rent on a place he still emotionally owned. Our first few years saw typical spats over money and parental interference. My in-laws would drop by unannounced, sometimes bringing new furniture that clashed with my style, or rearranging the living room because their decorator suggested a better layout. I swallowed my irritation whenever my wife waved off my complaints. "They're just trying to help," she said. I started noticing that everything about our life was an extension of their tastes, their control. But I told myself all couples have issues with in-laws. We'd get past it. One day I got a call at work from my wife. Her voice was trembling with excitement. "You won't believe this," she said. "I just won the lottery." I nearly dropped my phone. "Wait, what?" "I swear it's real. $9 million. I bought a ticket at a gas station on a whim and the numbers matched." That's incredible," I said. Visions of an early retirement, travel, philanthropic projects. My mind soared with possibilities. We had joked before about what we'd do if we ever became millionaires. Give some to my parents, buy a house not controlled by Phil, maybe even open my own business. I remember trembling with giddy excitement. Life was about to change. But as the days passed, the excitement wore thin. My wife became cagey about the money. She insisted we keep it quiet, especially from my side of the family. She said she was meeting with attorneys, people I'd never heard of, and assured me it was necessary to claim the money properly. "Shouldn't I come with you?" I said. She shook her head. "These lawyers are used to big estates. You'd feel out of place. I'll fill you in after." That stung more than I cared to admit. Over the next few weeks, I felt increasingly pushed aside. Each time I asked about the lottery money, how it would be managed, whether we'd pay off the condo, she grew dismissive or simply said, "It's complicated." One dreary afternoon, I returned from work feeling exhausted. The sporting goods store had been understaffed, and I pulled a double shift. All I wanted was to collapse on the couch. Instead, I opened the door to find my wife and her Aunt Linda rummaging through drawers, packing items into boxes. "What's going on?" I said. My wife straightened up, her face set in a hard line. "I'm filing for divorce," she said. "Pack your things. I want you gone tonight." My heart plummeted. "What are you talking about?" Aunt Linda, tall, hawkish, swept a critical eye over me. "The condo's in her name, financed with her father's money," she said. "You have no right to stay here." I couldn't process it. The woman I loved, who had just won a multi-million-dollar lottery, was kicking me out? "Please," I said, "can we talk this through?" My wife pressed her lips into a thin line. "I'll have my lawyer contact you. Now leave before we call security." I felt my throat tighten. I'd been paying half the mortgage for years, but she acted as though it was entirely her property. I grabbed a few essential items, some clothes, a toothbrush, and walked out the door. My entire life unraveled in a matter of minutes. Shaken, I drove to my parents' house. My father opened the door, alarmed to see me with a duffel bag and a haunted expression. "What happened?" he said. I choked out the words. "She won the lottery, filed for divorce, and kicked me out." My mother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. My father's eyes hardened, his jaw flexing. He stepped aside, letting me enter. That night, as my mother railed about my in-laws' snobbishness and heartlessness, my father took a calmer approach, anger simmering beneath the surface, but he stayed pragmatic. "You need an attorney," he said. "We have to see how that prenup affects everything." I buried my face in my hands. That's the problem. Her parents insisted on it, so now I bet it leaves me with nothing. My father paused. "We don't know that yet. Let's find out." 2 days later, I found myself in a modest law office, the blinds casting striped shadows across the desk of my father's old friend, Mr. Carlson, a family law attorney. I slid the prenup across to him, explaining how Phil and Mael had insisted on it, how it specifically aimed to protect my wife's inherited assets. He flipped through the pages, then let out a soft chuckle. "They shot themselves in the foot," he said. My heart fluttered with hope. "What do you mean?" He pointed to a paragraph. "They locked down inherited wealth, trust funds, and gifts from her family as separate property. But they also included a clause about any windfall acquired during the marriage being marital property. That covers lottery winnings specifically unless it's stated otherwise." I stared, stunned. "They wrote that in?" He nodded. "Yes. They were so focused on preventing you from claiming her family's estate that they forgot to exclude lottery gains. Barring some bizarre judicial interpretation, you're entitled to a substantial portion of that prize." A wave of relief and anger collided in me. On one hand, I was outraged that they'd so callously tried to discard me. On the other hand, I realized I wasn't powerless. That same week, rumors began to circulate that my wife was living it up, and not alone. A mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing her around town with an old coworker named Scott. Scott had worked with her at a marketing firm years ago, and apparently, they'd reconnected around the time she won the lottery. My mother frowned when I told her. You think she's been cheating? I shrugged, feeling sick. I don't know, but it sure looks that way, doesn't it? An image flashed through my mind. My wife, once so demure and sweet, now traveling with this ex-coworker, newly flush with cash. Could that be the real reason she was pushing me out? I filed the suspicion away. I was already reeling from the eviction, the looming divorce. The thought of her cheating with an old coworker was like a final dagger in my chest, but I needed facts before I confronted her. My father-in-law, Phil, didn't waste time making his stance known. One morning, my phone buzzed with a private number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Listen, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You'll never see a penny of that lottery money. You're a nobody, and I'll use every means to make sure you walk away with zero. Actually, I said, forcing my voice to remain calm, the prenup states something different. He let out a mocking laugh. You think that matters? I have lawyers, and they know every judge in town. You'll be bankrupt from legal fees alone. Back off if you know what's good for you. I hung up, my hands shaking. Mr. Carlson had predicted intimidation tactics, and they were already in play. My father's advice echoed in my mind. Document everything. I typed up the details of the call, emailed them to my lawyer, and saved the voice message for the record. The tension escalated. My mother-in-law, Maëlle, approached me outside my parents' home 2 days later. She wore an impeccable designer coat, her hair pinned in an elegant twist, but her eyes gleamed with anger. I have a proposition for you, she said, glancing around to ensure no neighbors were listening. What is it? She handed me a piece of paper that listed a dollar amount. It wasn't even enough to cover half the mortgage payments I'd already made on the condo. Take this and walk away, she said. It's more than you deserve. I exhaled a humorless laugh. You're joking, right? Her brow furrowed. You're from a humble family. This sum is generous for someone of your background. Why drag this through the courts? I tore the paper in half. No thanks, I'll see you in court, she scoffed, turning on her heel. Ungrateful, she hissed, striding off to her waiting car. The engine roared and she was gone. Meanwhile, I kept hearing rumors about my wife spending time with Scott, the ex-coworker. One day, I ran into Angela, a mutual friend, at a coffee shop. Sorry to pry, she said, but are you two separated? I saw your wife with Scott at a fancy restaurant. They looked close. My stomach clenched. They're probably just friends, I forced out. Angela sighed. They were holding hands. The floor dropped beneath me. She had likely been cheating, using the lottery win to cut me loose. I swallowed my anger, no public scene. Mr. Carlson filed a motion to freeze the lottery funds. The next day, my father-in-law's lawyers tried to block it, and failed. We pursued a contested divorce, arguing the prenup clearly included all windfalls acquired during marriage. I had contributed financially from day one. At a preliminary hearing, I saw my wife again. She arrived with her parents and 2 attorneys, her expression distant, refusing to meet my eyes. Afterward, I stepped forward. She paused in the hallway, arms crossed. How long? I said quietly. She glared. What do you mean? How long have you been with Scott, the ex-coworker? Her cheeks flushed. That's none of your business. So you were sleeping with him while I was working double shifts? I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. She cast a quick glance at her father, who scowled from a few feet away. Then she leaned in, dropping her voice to a hiss. You have no idea what it was like being suffocated by your mediocrity. Scott understands me. He's successful, interesting. I was tired of waiting for you to catch up. My mouth went dry. So that's how you see me? A stepping stone? She shrugged, lifting her chin in defiance. I see you as someone who doesn't belong in my world. Now, if you'll excuse me, don't expect me to walk away empty-handed, I said. I won't. You and your parents started this war. She narrowed her eyes. War? Really? Fine. See you in court then. With that, she spun on her heel, joining her parents. I stood, breathing heavily, the pain in my chest like a knife twisting deeper. Phil, furious at my refusal to yield, tried to sabotage me at work. He called the owner of the sporting goods store, my boss, and implied that if they didn't fire me, it might jeopardize some expansion plans. My boss, who had known me for years, simply told Phil to mind his own business. In response, I got an angry text from my wife. You can't keep mooching off decent people. Grow up and face the reality that no one wants you around. My father's done playing nice. I saved the text, forwarding it to Mr. Carlson. I refuse to engage in a text war. My father's voice echoed in my mind. Document everything, and don't stoop to their level. Weeks crept by. The stress consumed me, yet I clung to the knowledge that the law was on my side. Behind the scenes, my lawyer scoured every line of the prenup, highlighting the clause that read, all financial windfalls acquired during the period of marriage. This includes, but is not limited to, monetary prizes, lottery winnings, game show prizes, shall be deemed marital property and subject to equitable distribution unless specifically excluded within this document. They'd meticulously excluded inherited wealth, trusts, family gifts, but ironically, they never excluded lottery winnings. It was a glaring oversight. Their obsession with protecting the family estate had inadvertently left a trapdoor open. Meanwhile, rumors of my wife's relationship with Scott spread like wildfire. They were seen at clubs, fancy hotels, and exotic restaurants. My mother asked me if I'd consider using that infidelity as leverage in court. Mr. Carlson shook his head. Our state is no-fault divorce, so her cheating doesn't necessarily guarantee you more money. The real gem is that prenup. That's all you need. I realized it wasn't about revenge alone. It was about not being bullied into walking away with nothing. The final court date loomed on the horizon, a black cloud threatening to unleash a storm of legal showdowns and personal vendettas. 1 week before that dreaded day, my phone buzzed in the dimness of my parents' living room. It was nearly midnight. I'd just finished sorting through endless stacks of documents with my lawyer and was dozing off in an armchair. I glanced at the caller ID. It was my wife. We hadn't spoken directly in weeks, ever since she'd had me thrown out of the condo. My heart hammered with mixed rage and curiosity. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello? I said, keeping my voice neutral. Hey, she said. I heard an odd tremor in her tone as if she were forcing herself to sound calm. Can we talk? My stomach twisted. Talk about what exactly? She hesitated, exhaling a shaky breath. I don't want things to get too messy in court. Maybe we can settle this ourselves. Come to some arrangement that's fair for both sides. Her words made me laugh bitterly. Fair for both sides? She and her parents had tried to bury me from day one, kicking me out, labeling me a parasite, claiming the lottery ticket was hers alone. Now she wanted to speak of fairness? Define fair, I said, my voice colder than I intended. She let out a quick, impatient sigh. We can keep this private. Sign an NDA or something so the media or our social circles won't sniff around. You'll get some money, more than we offered before, but obviously a lot less than what your lawyer is pushing for now. That way, we can keep my parents out of the spotlight and you can walk away safe. So this was the latest hush bribe. A small wave of relief flickered in me, confirming they still feared the final verdict. But I felt my anger surge. How dare she believe I'd jump at another lowball? No thanks, I said. I'm done negotiating behind closed doors. We'll see what the judge says. She drew a sharp breath. When she spoke again, her voice brimmed with scorn. You're an idiot! Do you have any clue what my parents can do to you? If they pull every connection they have, you'll never work in this city again, or any city within 300 miles. A spark of my old fear flared, yet I pressed my lips tight and forced myself to remain firm. I guess I'll take that risk, I said. Goodbye. I hung up before she could retaliate. My hand shook. For a moment, doubt gnawed at me. Was I making a colossal mistake by refusing her final offer? I pictured myself blacklisted, jobless, maybe forced to relocate. But then I remembered the humiliation, the arrogance from her father, and the way she had thrust me out of my own home. Mr. Carlson, my lawyer, had insisted we were on solid legal ground. We had the prenup's exact wording to protect us. If they tried to stall, the judge would see right through it. With that thought, I steadied my resolve. No more fear. No more bowing down. I was in this fight until the end. The morning of the final hearing arrived, draped in low gray clouds that threatened rain. I slipped on my best suit, charcoal gray, hardly designer, but it fit me well enough. My mother fussed over my tie, telling me in hushed tones, "We believe in you." Outside the courthouse, I met Mr. Carlson. We exchanged a grim nod. My parents hovered a few steps back, offering moral support, but letting me handle the fight that was ultimately mine. The courthouse lobby buzzed with tension, men and women in suits, attorneys checking their phones, a clerk calling out names. I spotted my wife, exquisitely dressed in a tailored blazer and pencil skirt, sitting on a bench near the hallway. Her father stood behind her, arms crossed, lips drawn tight. Her mother was there too, whispering something in her ear, occasionally shooting me a venomous glare. They had 4 attorneys milling around them, rummaging through thick leather briefcases and comparing notes. My wife shot me a dismissive glance. She quickly turned away, flipping her hair with an arrogant flick of her wrist. In that moment, I felt like the villain of the story she'd likely told everyone. The freeloading, money-grubbing husband refusing to let her live her life. "Come on," Mr. Carlson said quietly. "Let's get inside." The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Rows of stiff wooden benches faced the judge's elevated seat. I took my place at the petitioner's table, Mr. Carlson at my side, while my wife and her squad of attorneys spread out at the respondent's table. The bailiff called the session to order, and a stern-faced judge, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pinned up, rapped her gavel. "We're here to determine the equitable distribution of marital assets in the divorce proceedings of—" She read our names, scanning our faces. I steeled myself, ignoring the knot in my stomach. My wife's lead attorney started with the same tired refrain. The lottery ticket was purchased independently with her personal funds. He claimed the money was never intended to be shared. Mr. Carlson stood, voice calm. "With respect, Your Honor, we have clear bank records. My client's wife used a joint debit card, both names on the account, to buy the ticket. Additionally, the prenuptial agreement explicitly includes lottery winnings as marital assets." At that, the judge lifted a brow. She motioned for Mr. Carlson to hand up the relevant documents. I watched my father-in-law's face twitch with annoyance. When my wife finally spoke, her voice carried a sharp edge. "I never intended to cheat him. My parents were just extremely worried about opportunists coming after me. I was under pressure and things escalated. I'm sorry if it felt abrupt." Felt abrupt? She tossed me out onto the street with no warning. I clenched my jaw but said nothing. The judge studied her over the rim of her glasses, unimpressed. Then her father's lawyer took a more aggressive tack. I was the unscrupulous villain. "Your Honor, this man contributed almost nothing to the household. He was reliant on my client's father's generous down payment for their condo. He was, in essence, freeloading off her family wealth. We ask that the court recognize he has no rightful claim." Freeloading. The word stung. Mr. Carlson calmly fired back. "We have receipts for monthly mortgage payments, utility bills, groceries. My client paid thousands over the years. He certainly didn't freeload. In fact, he contributed far more than they admit." We spent hours lobbing evidence back and forth. The tension in the air was electric, every claim met with a rebuttal. My wife's gaze turned increasingly hostile. I felt the hateful glare from her parents like daggers in my back. By late afternoon, the judge rapped her gavel lightly. "I want quiet in this courtroom," she said, voice firm. Papers rustled as attorneys paused their frantic note-taking. She picked up the prenuptial agreement with a wry twist of her lips. "In reviewing the language here," she said, "it is quite clear that any financial windfall arising during the marriage is considered marital property, subject to equitable distribution. This court sees no ambiguity in that. Therefore, the lottery winnings in question are indeed a shared marital asset." A hush fell over the room. My father-in-law's jaw clenched. My wife blinked rapidly, color draining from her face. The judge continued, turning her gaze on my wife. "Additionally, you evicted your spouse from the condominium with no formal notice or due process, despite his financial contributions. This action was both unkind and legally relevant to the question of fairness." I caught a faint smirk from Mr. Carlson, though he hid it well. The judge's next words sealed everything. "Therefore, the court rules that the lottery winnings shall be subject to an equitable split, with a substantial portion awarded to the petitioner." She glanced in my direction, then added, "Furthermore, the petitioner is entitled to reimbursement for his share of the mortgage, utilities, and other marital expenses he covered." It was everything we had hoped for. Relief flooded me, but I kept my expression neutral. The judge's hammering final words echoed through the quiet. "We will reconvene if needed for final calculations, but that is my ruling. Court adjourned." She slammed the gavel and the bailiff called, "All rise." We stood. My knees felt weak. The war was effectively over. As soon as the judge left, the courtroom exploded into a murmured uproar. Reporters, the few who had gathered outside for local gossip, pressed forward, trying to peer into the doors. My father-in-law marched up to me, his face an alarming shade of red. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You have no idea what we can still do. We'll appeal, we'll—" I squared my shoulders, letting the swirl of resentment and triumph mingle. It is over, the judge decided. My wife stood off to the side, arms wrapped around herself, tears brimming in her eyes, but they looked more like tears of rage than sadness. My mother-in-law glowered from behind, whispering sharply at her daughter. Mr. Carlson gently touched my arm. "We should go," he said. "Leave them to their meltdown." But before I could turn, my wife suddenly launched herself at me. Her expression twisted, and an animalistic sound tore from her throat. "You worthless scum!" she shrieked. "You ruined me!" She swung her purse, aiming for my shoulder. I managed to duck, but not before she clawed at my sleeve. The bailiff and a security officer rushed forward, trying to intervene. "Ma'am, you need to step back," the bailiff commanded. Her father, stunned, barked, "What are you doing? Stop it!" But she was beyond reason, tears streaking down her cheeks, spitting fury. "You think you've won?" she yelled, voice echoing in the high-ceilinged chamber. "You're just a parasite who fooled everyone into believing you were decent. You disgusting gold-digging liar!" I stumbled backward, adrenaline spiking. I'd never seen her this unhinged, not even during our worst fights. My mother gasped in horror from across the aisle. Mr. Carlson slid in front of me, arms slightly raised as if to shield me. A security officer grabbed my wife's arm. "Ma'am, calm down, or we'll have to remove you." She struggled, face contorting with rage. "Let go!" she screamed. "He's stealing my money! How can you people allow this? Do you know who my father is?" The officer tightened his grip, forcibly pulling her away from me. "Enough," he said. "Court's over. We don't tolerate violence here." My wife's attorney scrambled forward, holding up his hands. "Your Honor," but the judge had already departed. Another clerk rushed in, appalled at the commotion. In a swirl of suits and confusion, my wife was restrained, continuing to hurl insults at me. Her father looked aghast, caught between wanting to protect his daughter and not wanting to cause a bigger scene. My mother-in-law pressed a hand to her mouth. The bailiff, motioning for more security, barked, "She's assaulted him in open court! That's contempt! She'll have to answer to the judge!" My wife spat on the ground, trembling with rage. "He's the one who used me! He married me for money! He's the villain, not me!" I could only stare, heart pounding. In that moment, I realized how far gone we both were. She with her arrogant meltdown, me with my seething anger. We'd turned into caricatures of a broken marriage, a violent spectacle for all to see. Security hustled my wife out of the courtroom, pulling her toward the hallway where the judge's chambers were located. I heard shouts, muffled by the thick walls, as she presumably argued with the officer. My father-in-law trailed after them, waving his arms and demanding they release her. Mr. Carlson exhaled. "That was unexpected." I swallowed, my throat dry. She lost it. We waited on the benches for what felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, my mother approached, tearful and shaking. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, though my voice sounded hollow in my ears. Minutes later, a stern-faced bailiff informed us that the judge had pronounced an immediate contempt citation. My wife would be required to pay a substantial fine for assaulting me in court. She was also ordered to remain in custody until she could be processed, albeit briefly, for her outburst. "They're not pressing further charges," the bailiff said, eyeing me. "Do you want to file an assault charge?" I hesitated. Part of me was enraged enough to consider it, but another part felt an odd pity. She was lashing out because of her own mistakes and arrogance. "No," I said at last. "No formal charge. The court's reaction is enough." The bailiff nodded. "Understood." A few days later, after the dust settled, my wife was released. Her attorneys quietly moved to finalize the settlement, avoiding further embarrassment after her public breakdown. Word had spread through legal circles, even reaching minor tabloids. She avoided serious charges, but her reputation was in ruins. On a gray afternoon, I arrived at the attorney's office. My father-in-law glowered. My wife sat stiffly, eyes puffy, avoiding my gaze. The arrogance was gone, replaced by silent defeat. Her mother hovered nearby, whispering to their lawyer. They handed me the final documents, a large lump sum from the $9 million and full release of condo claims. I signed without hesitation. Mr. Carlson reviewed every page before sliding me the pen. "Congratulations," he murmured. My ex-wife signed, lips tight. Her father shoved a check across the table. "Take it. Hope you're happy." I glanced around. My ex stared blankly, lost in thought. When the last signature was in place, the attorneys nodded. The settlement was done. No one said goodbye.